Greetings and welcome to my new YouTube channel where I'm going to be giving album reviews, vlog type videos, all that jazz. For those who may recognize my name, that's because I write album reviews for UltimateGuitar.com. Now, I don't always get to post the reviews of albums that I'd like to review, so I decided that I would dish these reviews out to you on YouTube. Hope you like them. So for my first review, I want to tackle a band that is incredibly dear to me, very important, and that is Japanese metal group Durongray. These guys opened up a whole new world to me of Japanese visual kei metal, something a little bit left of center, and they've been on this really steady evolutionary path that has taken them into the realms of being one of the premier avant-garde progressive metal groups of our time. And this is their 10th studio record so far, along with a smattering of EPs, non-album singles, and other compilations. And it's amazing. This band has been around since the mid-90s, has never had a lineup change or an extended hiatus. They've just been putting out album after album of good, solid music. And so here we are at album number 10, The Insulated World. I've been sitting on this review for a little bit because traditionally with Durongray albums, I tend to not really care too much for them at first. And as time goes on, I tend to start to warm up to them. You can see this in my Ultimate Guitar review of Ouroboros, where I rip the album, and nowadays I consider it probably one of my top 10 albums of all time. So, The Insulated World does need to be taken in a little bit of context with their previous records. Dumpspiro Sparrow and Ouroboros, as well as the EP The Unraveling, kind of took the band in a very technical, progressive direction, while RK kind of stripped down things a little bit, took out some of the avant-garde, extreme metal tendencies, and went more for a melodic, song-based approach. And The Insulated World continues this, but is also kind of a bit of a reaction to RK a bit, where some of the melodicism has gone out the window on this record. Straight from the opening track, and I have to refer to my notes because these are Japanese song titles and I'm never going to remember them all. Kaibetsu to Hajimari, they just go right for the jugular, right out of the gate with a punchy, thrashy song. This is just brutal, lots of harsh vocals, fast drumming, simple guitar riffs, but it just kicks you in the face right from the get-go, which is actually something that isn't very traditional for Durongray albums. They tend to kind of start with something a little slower to ease you into the record, but this time they're going straight for the jugular. On the second track, Devote My Life, they up the ante even further with a very clear industrial influence, very atonal, dissonant, jagged guitar playing, and Kyo, the vocalist, absolutely rips out his vocal cords on this track. This track almost approaches Merzbow levels of noise rock insanity. And then from there on, we start to get a little bit more of a mix of that kind of style, the heavier, industrial, punch you in the face, visceral quality, with poppy melodic choruses, big sing-along moments, and this is in a lot of the tracks, especially the first single, Ningen wo Kaburu, which is, it has a wonderful chorus, and we also hear that with tracks like Utafumi, where there is still a very melodic element, even though the guitar work in that song is incredibly simple. Where the first real issue with this album starts to come in is with the pacing. Now, you start to notice that the first half of the record is incredibly visceral, heavy. It's relentless. It just pummels you for the first 9 tracks, give or take 1 or 2 songs. And there are a couple of highlights in this whole section, like the track Aka, which is, I'd like to think is probably the first real song on the album where melody is performed for melody's sake. It's a little bit more of a traditional prog metal track, lots of clean vocals and clean guitars, really excellent guitar solo in the middle. There are a couple more tracks after that that still kind of go with the heavier sound, but it's that first like 7 or 8 tracks on the record where everything is just wall of sound, noise. And then things kind of start to peter out a bit near the end. Now, after Aka, we have the track Values of Madness, which is, I think, the first real indication that all of a sudden things are starting to kind of go in a bit more of a melodic direction. And the vocal work in that track, I need to single that out as being particularly good. Kyo kind of goes for a style that he hasn't really touched on since the days of the albums they were putting out before Withering to Death, when they were still only releasing albums in Japan. And I think I specifically relate this track to Jessica from their third album, Kiso. But after a few more tracks that display almost a bit of a Dillinger Escape Plan-esque sort of mathcore vibe, suddenly the last 4 tracks on the record kind of go for the very ballad-esque approach. Lots of clean vocals, clean guitar work, not a whole lot of heaviness going on. And it's like that for the rest of the album, including, again, I have to consult my notes for titles and pronunciations, Zetsuentai, which is the album's longest track at just a bit over 7 minutes, where suddenly the melodic nature of these tracks means that they do have a bit of a build-up, but there's not really a build-up to anything because these are the tracks that lead us out of the album. It almost feels a bit like when the batteries die in your Walkman. You start off with this really high energy, high octane performance, and then it kind of gradually slows down. And it's a real shame, too, because a couple of these tracks are totally excellent. I mean, Ranunculus, the album's closing track, is probably the best melodic metal number the band has released since the Vulgar record. It's a really great song, but I feel like both the heavier songs and the softer songs on this album would have benefited a little bit more had they kind of been spread a little more evenly. This is a very uneven listen to sit and listen to this record as a whole work. And it doesn't really lend itself very well to listening to this record in one sitting. So it is a bit uneven. The other major issue that I have with this record is a rather big doozy of one, and it is the production, specifically the mixing and mastering of this record. Oh my goodness, this is probably the worst master job I've heard since Metallica's Death Magnetic. The guitars and drums are way into the red for clipping. This is absolutely brutal. And I have yet to find a device to listen to this record on that it sounds good on. Now, I'm judging this based on the Spotify and iTunes releases of the record. If anyone has it on vinyl or CD or any other physical format and wants to tell me that it's actually a pretty good sounding record, please comment down below. I'd like to know, because in all conscience, I can't recommend this album simply on the production quality alone. So where does this record stand overall to me? I think that it has some very strong individual tracks. There's some really good music on this record, and of course, Durham Gray has yet to actually produce a truly bad record, and this album is no exception. There's lots of really good music on this. If you're into the kind of avant-garde metal prog stuff that they do, this album will still satisfy that hunger. But as a whole experience, as an album, it's probably not their best work to date. There's a lot of fundamental flaws with this record regarding its pacing, its production, and I have a tendency to like more complex guitar riffs, more complex arrangements, and this album does seem to be erring a little bit more on the simple side of things. So, I don't think that this is a bad album, but I still think I'd recommend streaming it rather than buying it. Anyway, that's Dir Gray's The Insulated World. If I had to rate it out of 10, I'd say probably a 6.5. Anyway, thank you for watching. If you like these videos and you want to see more, like, comment, subscribe, do all the things that I'm pointing at down there. That's my leg, but if my leg were a subscribe button, you'd hit it. That was awkward. Toodles.